My relatives laughed when they saw the old army jacket my grandfather left me. I never thought my grandfather's old army jacket would change my life. Not even close. At 34, I was a family disappointment, stuck in a dead-end job, renting a crappy apartment, and driving a car that made concerning noises every time I hit 50 miles per hour. But I was the only one who visited Grandpa Joe regularly at the hospice. My cousins, aunts, and uncles always had excuses. Too busy with work, kids' soccer games, or just scrolling mindlessly through social media. Meanwhile, I spent every Thursday afternoon sitting with him, listening to his raspy war stories while drinking that awful vending machine coffee he swore was the best damn cup in the world. Grandpa wasn't rich by any means, but he had enough to make the family interested. A modest house in the suburbs of Milwaukee, about $120,000 in savings, and a collection of silver coins everyone had mentally divided up years ago. I never once asked about any of it. We just talked about fishing, his time in Vietnam, and how my job hunt was going. Sometimes we'd just sit in comfortable silence, watching whatever game was on the small TV mounted in the corner of his room. The nurses always smiled when I showed up. "Joe's been waiting for you," they'd say. "He won't take his meds until you get here." That always made me feel guilty on the rare occasions I was running late. When he passed, it wasn't unexpected, but it still hit me like a truck. The hospice called me first, not my dad, not my Aunt Linda who lived closest, me. I sat with him during his final hours while waiting for others to arrive. Most didn't make it in time. 2 weeks later, we all gathered at the lawyer's office for the reading of the will. The family materialized like magic. Relatives I hadn't seen in years suddenly appeared, dressed in respectful dark colors and sporting solemn expressions that didn't quite reach their eyes. My cousin Dave kept checking stock prices on his phone. Aunt Linda was already discussing what she'd do with her share of Grandpa's house with her husband. I sat in the back, nursing a coffee that tasted even worse than the hospice vending machine brew, wishing I was anywhere else. The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who spoke with the enthusiasm of someone reading a phone book. He cleared his throat and began going through the standard legal jargon before getting to the distributions. To my son, Robert, I leave half of my savings account at First Wisconsin Bank, totaling $60,000. To my daughter Linda and her children, I leave my house at 1421 Maple Street and my entire collection of silver coins to be divided as they see fit, as well as the remaining $60,000 from my savings. My father nodded stiffly, while Aunt Linda and my cousins exchanged satisfied glances. As the only child of my father, Robert, I wasn't mentioned yet. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and continued. And to my grandson, Michael, I leave my Army field jacket. He'll understand why. The room went silent for a beat before someone snickered. I felt everyone's eyes turn toward me. "That's it?" My cousin Dave whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "The old man left you his jacket?" Aunt Linda leaned over to her daughter. Poor Mikey, all those hours at the hospice for a smelly old coat. My father looked embarrassed, shooting me an apologetic glance. As his only son, I knew he had expected me to receive something more substantial too. Mr. Peterson handed me a plastic bag containing the faded olive green M65 jacket I'd seen Grandpa wear 1,000 times. When he taught me to fish, when he fixed his old pickup truck, when we went camping up north. It smelled like motor oil, wood smoke, and Old Spice. It smelled like him. I clutched the jacket while Aunt Linda and her kids excitedly discussed logistics about the house, and when they could start appraising the coin collection. No one spoke to me directly. What was there to say? Sorry you got the short end of the stick? Better luck next time? Even my father seemed more concerned with his portion of the inheritance than with how I'd been left out. As people started filing out, my cousin Dave patted my shoulder. "Hey, if you want, I can give you one of the silver dollars when we split things up. So you get something real." His smile didn't reach his eyes. It was just like Dave to rub it in that he and his siblings got the coins while I, the only grandchild who actually spent time with Grandpa, got nothing but an old jacket. I just shook my head. "Keep it. I'm good." Driving home, I tossed the jacket onto the passenger seat. I wasn't angry or disappointed. That would have required expecting something in the first place. I visited Grandpa because he was the only adult who ever really saw me, who listened without judgment, who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I never wanted his money. Still, I couldn't help wondering about his choice. He'll understand why, the will had said, but I didn't understand, not yet. Back at my apartment, I hung the jacket in my closet next to my collection of faded band t-shirts and forgotten dress clothes from job interviews. Then I ordered a pizza, cracked open a beer, and tried to lose myself in a ball game, pushing aside thoughts of Grandpa and his final gift. 2 days later, my dad called. "Listen, Mike, about the will." "It's fine, Dad. I don't care about the money." "I know, but it doesn't seem fair. I was thinking I could give you some of my share. Seriously, don't worry about it." The last thing I wanted was guilt money. Grandpa knew what he was doing. The conversation ended awkwardly, as most of our conversations did. We'd never been close, not like Grandpa and me. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I landed a new job at a local marketing firm. Nothing glamorous, but better than my previous gig. The family was busy cleaning out Grandpa's house to put it on the market. No one asked for my help, and I didn't offer. October arrived with an unexpected cold snap. One morning, shivering as I got ready for work, I stared at my pathetic collection of thin hoodies and worn denim jackets. None of them would be enough for the bitter wind that had blown in overnight. That's when I remembered the jacket. Grandpa's old army coat had been hanging in my closet for weeks, untouched since the day of the will reading. I'd shoved it to the back, behind my collection of faded band t-shirts and forgotten dress clothes from job interviews. I reached in and pulled it out, running my fingers over the faded olive green fabric. Despite everything, despite the hurt of being left out of the real inheritance, I couldn't help but smile at the familiar smell: motor oil, wood smoke, and Old Spice. Pure Grandpa Joe. The canvas material was stiff but sturdy. They really did make things to last back then, unlike the cheap junk I usually wore. As I held up to the light, memories flooded back. Fishing trips up north, helping him fix that old pickup truck, sitting on the porch while he told his war stories. "He'll understand why," the will had said, but I didn't understand, not yet. What I did know was that it was freezing outside, I was late for work, and Grandpa's old M65 field jacket was the warmest thing I owned. I slipped it off the hanger, the weight of it surprising me. Heavier than it looked. Probably built to withstand a lot worse than a Milwaukee autumn. Little did I know then, as I pulled that old army jacket from my closet, that my life was about to change forever. That old army jacket quickly became my favorite piece of clothing. Fall in Milwaukee is a special kind of brutal. One day at a mild 65 degrees, the next you're scraping frost off your windshield before work. Grandpa Joe's M65 field jacket was perfect for those unpredictable autumn days. The first time I actually wore it out in public was for my usual morning coffee run. The olive green canvas was sturdy but comfortable, like it had been broken in for decades, which it had. The jacket had character, history etched into every worn spot and faded patch. Ryan, the barista at my regular coffee spot downtown, did a double take when I walked in. He was one of those hipster types with a carefully trimmed beard and sleeve tattoos who normally didn't seem impressed by much of anything. "Dude, that jacket is sick. Vietnam-era M65, right? Authentic vintage?" I nodded, feeling an unexpected surge of pride. "Yeah, my grandfather's. He left it to me when he passed." "Man, you could sell that for serious cash. Military surplus is huge right now. There's this vintage shop over on Brady Street that would pay top dollar." The thought of selling it hadn't crossed my mind, not even for a second. This wasn't some fashion statement or trending aesthetic. This was Grandpa Joe, his smell still faintly lingering in the fabric, his life somehow woven into the threads. "Not for sale," I said, accepting my coffee. "It's the only thing of his I have." Ryan seemed to understand, nodding with genuine respect. "That's cool, man. Way more meaningful that way." That weekend, I met my dad for our monthly lunch, a tradition we'd started after Grandpa passed, like we both suddenly realized we didn't want to make the same mistakes with each other. We weren't close, but we were trying, in our awkward way. He noticed the jacket immediately, his eyes lingering on it before quickly glancing away. "So you're actually wearing it," he said, stirring his coffee absently. "Yeah, it's surprisingly warm," I replied, unsure what else to say. Dad nodded slowly. Dad never went anywhere without that thing once the weather turned. It used to drive Mom crazy. She bought him nice coats every Christmas, but he'd just wear that old army thing. Said it was the most practical piece of clothing ever designed. It was the most my father had spoken about Grandpa since the funeral. I wanted to ask more, but the waitress arrived with our food, and Dad immediately changed the subject to the Packers' chances this season. The jacket quickly became my everyday companion. Walking to work, I'd noticed people giving it approving glances. A college kid asked if it was authentic military, and I found myself standing a little straighter when I said yes. One afternoon at the gas station, an older man at the pump across from me caught my eye. Had to be in his 70s at least, with a Vietnam veteran's cap and a weathered face that had seen some serious things in its time. "M65 field jacket," he said, nodding at me. "Had one just like it back in '68. Still got it somewhere in my attic. Best damn jacket Uncle Sam ever issued." Before I could respond, he asked, "Your dad's?" "Granddad's. Grandfather's. He passed recently." The old vet nodded, his eyes showing a flash of understanding that went deeper than words. "We're proud, son. Lot of history in those jackets." More than he knew. Over the next few weeks, I discovered little details about the jacket I'd never noticed before. How the fabric was reinforced at stress points. The way the collar could be turned up against the wind. The tiny pen slot in the arm pocket that Grandpa had worn smooth from years of keeping a mechanical pencil there. I found his initials stitched in faded black thread inside the collar. J.M. Joseph Mitchell. The stitching was neat and professional, probably done by the quartermaster when he was issued the jacket. I ran my fingers over those initials sometimes, feeling a connection to him that was hard to explain. The jacket had 4 main pockets, 2 chest and 2 lower ones, plus smaller compartments for pens, a first aid kit, and whatever else a soldier might need in the field. The design was practical, functional, with no wasted space. Just like Grandpa. One night after work, I noticed the right sleeve had picked up a coffee stain from my morning commute. Not wanting to ruin my inheritance, I decided to spot clean it before it set permanently. I'd never been much for laundry skills. Just ask any of my ex-girlfriends. But I figured I could handle a small stain. I grabbed some stain remover from under the sink and laid the jacket flat on my kitchen table, carefully dabbing at the brown splotch. That's when I noticed something odd. Inside the jacket, near the bottom hem, there was a section where the lining didn't quite match the rest. The olive drab liner fabric had a slightly different shade in a rectangular section about 6 inches long. Looking closer, I saw stitching that was newer than the rest of the seams, tighter, with thread that hadn't faded to match the decades-old original. I ran my fingers over it, feeling something firm beneath. Not paper like you'd expect if someone had sewn in documents. This was hard, with defined edges. My heart rate picked up. I remembered Grandpa's words in the will. "He'll understand why." Was this what he meant? I carefully examined the stitching. It was good work. You'd never notice it unless you were really looking. Someone had created a hidden pocket in the lining, and recently, too, by the look of the thread. I hesitated for a moment. If Grandpa had wanted me to find whatever was hidden here, why not just give it to me directly? Why the secret compartment? Was this even his work, or had someone else modified the jacket? But curiosity won out, as it always does. I grabbed a small pair of scissors from my junk drawer and carefully snipped one section of the newer stitching. To my surprise, what I found wasn't just a makeshift pocket. It was a professionally installed zipper hidden under the outer layer of stitching. Someone had modified this jacket with an actual secret compartment, complete with zipper closure that lay flat enough to be invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. This wasn't some last-minute hiding spot. This was intentional, planned, and expertly executed. My hands were actually shaking a little as I pulled the zipper open. Inside was something wrapped in what looked like an old handkerchief or maybe a piece of soft flannel. I carefully removed it and set it on the table. Unwrapping the cloth revealed a watch. Not some fancy Rolex or anything, but a military-style timepiece that had clearly seen better days. The face was scratched, the leather band cracked with age and wear. It wasn't running, though I could tell it was a mechanical watch, the kind you need to wind. With some cleaning and proper servicing, it might tick again. I turned the watch over my hand, feeling its weight. It was solid, sturdy, built for combat conditions, not fashion. There appeared to be some kind of engraving on the back, but in the dim light of my kitchen, I couldn't make it out clearly. But there was something else in the secret pocket. A folded piece of paper had been tucked beneath the watch, attached to the inside of the pocket, with a small safety pin. I carefully unpinned it, feeling a surge of anticipation as I held the folded paper in my hands. The note was yellow with age, the creases deep and well-worn, as if it had been folded and unfolded many times before being hidden away. The handwriting visible on the outside fold was unmistakably Grandpa's, that careful block lettering he always used, though this looked steadier than the shaky script from his final years. Whatever this was, he'd written it long before his health started failing. The paper felt fragile between my fingers, like it might disintegrate if I handled it too roughly. How long had it been hidden away in this jacket? Years? Decades? I glanced at the clock. Almost midnight. Tomorrow was a work day, with an early meeting I couldn't miss. The responsible thing would be to get some sleep, to examine these items properly in the morning light. But when have I ever done the responsible thing? I held the watch and the folded note in my hands. These mysterious objects my grandfather had hidden away for who knows how long. Objects he wanted me to find, apparently. Objects that might explain why he'd left a supposedly favorite grandson nothing but an old army jacket when the rest of the family divided up his money and possessions. Why would he hide these things? What significance did they hold? And why choose me as their recipient? I stared at the folded note, my heart pounding with anticipation. Whatever secrets my grandfather had kept, whatever history this watch had witnessed, I was about to discover them. The watch felt suddenly heavier in my palm, weighted not just with metal but with mystery. My grandfather, the same man who taught me to fish, who fell asleep watching baseball games, who complained about his internet being broken when he just needed to restart his router, had been keeping some kind of secret. A secret hidden in a jacket that no one else wanted. I carefully unfolded the paper, my hand surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Whatever message my grandfather had left, whatever story he needed to tell even after death, I was finally ready to hear it. I carefully unfolded the note, the paper so thin and worn it almost felt like it might disintegrate between my fingers. The handwriting was unmistakably Grandpa Joe's, that slightly crooked script I'd seen on birthday cards and fishing permits all my life. I knew you'd wear this jacket because it meant something to me. You'll find this because you remember me. Joe. Simple, direct, pure Grandpa Joe. My throat tightened as I read it, hearing his gravelly voice in my head. He knew. Somehow, he knew I'd be the one to find this. Not because he told me about it, but because he understood me. He knew I wouldn't toss the jacket or sell it for vintage cash. He knew I'd wear it, care for it, and eventually find what he'd hidden. I picked up the watch again, giving it a closer look under the kitchen light. Now I could see it wasn't just any military timepiece. This thing was fancy, gold case, intricate dial, and a level of craftsmanship that screamed expensive. The scratches and where couldn't hide the quality. Turning it over, I now saw the engraving clearly. J.M. for heroism at Operation Overlord, June 6, 1944. Wait, 1944? D-Day? But that made no sense. Grandpa Joe fought in Vietnam, not World War II. He was born in 1946, 2 years after D-Day. This watch couldn't have been his originally. I sat back confused. The initials matched Joseph Mitchell, but the timeline was impossible. Had this belonged to another JM? Maybe his father, my great-grandfather? But why would Grandpa hide it in his Vietnam jacket, with a note addressed to me? I tried winding the watch, but the mechanism felt stiff. Decades without maintenance had taken their toll. Whatever secrets this timepiece held, they weren't giving themselves up easily. I barely slept that night, the watch and note on my nightstand, my mind racing with questions. The next morning, I called in late to work and headed straight to Ron's Watch Repair, a tiny shop wedged between a laundromat and a vape store in my neighborhood. Ron was a crusty old guy who'd been fixing watches since before digital was a thing. He had perpetually ink-stained fingers and a jeweler's loop that seemed permanently attached to his face. "What be you got for me today?" he asked as I walked in, not looking up from the disemboweled Timex on his workbench. I placed the watch carefully on the counter. "Found this in my grandfather's things. Wondering if you could tell me anything about it." Ron finally glanced up, reached for the watch, then froze. His expression changed completely as he took in what was sitting on his counter. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice suddenly serious as he reached for his loop. "My grandfather's. It was hidden in his old army jacket." Ron examined it carefully through his magnifier, his hands now treating the watch with the reverence of a priest handling sacred relics. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, actually paling a bit. "Kid, this isn't my league. This is a bomb." "A bomb?" I asked, confused. "A bombshell. This isn't some regular timepiece." He turned it over, pointing to markings I hadn't noticed. "This is a Patek Philippe. High-end Swiss manufacture. But this particular design..." He shook his head in disbelief. "I've only seen these in books." My heart was pounding now. "What is it?" "If I'm not mistaken, and I need to be clear, this needs authentication by people way above my pay grade. This looks like one of the Patek Philippe D-Day command watches." I must have looked as confused as I felt because Ron continued, excitement creeping into his voice despite his obvious attempt to remain professional. "During World War II, Patek Philippe made a small number of special watches for Allied commanders who led the D-Day invasion. These weren't commercially available. They were gifts from the Swiss government, a political move to show they weren't completely neutral, at least in spirit." He handed the watch back to me like it might explode. "Don't take this to just anyone. You need to contact Patek Philippe directly. Their headquarters in Geneva. They have a department that handles authentication of historical pieces." I left Ron's shop in a daze, the watch now feeling much heavier in my pocket. Back home, I Googled Patek Philippe D-Day Command and nearly fell out of my chair when the results loaded. There were only a few articles about them, mostly in auction house catalogs and high-end watch collector forums. But the information was consistent. They were incredibly rare and valuable. One had sold at Christie's auction house 5 years ago for $4.1 million. $4.1 million. I practically dropped my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type as I searched for contact information for Patek Philippe's headquarters. This couldn't be real. My grandfather, the same man who clipped coupons, who drove the same Ford pickup for 30 years, who thought Red Lobster was fancy dining, had hidden a multi-million-dollar watch in his old army jacket? It didn't make sense. The D-Day connection, the insane value, the fact that he'd hidden away instead of selling it, especially during the years when he was struggling financially after Grandma got sick. But I knew what I had to do. Following Ron's advice, I carefully photographed the watch from every angle, including close-ups of the engraving and any identifying markings. I composed an email to Patek Philippe's authentication department, trying to sound more knowledgeable than I was, explaining how I'd come into possession of what might be one of their historical pieces. Part of me expected no response. Why would a prestigious Swiss watch manufacturer care about some random American claiming to have found a rare timepiece? But 3 days later, I received a reply. They were interested, very interested. They requested I ship the watch to them for examination, with insurance for an appropriate value. They didn't specify what that meant. They would cover all shipping and insurance costs. I was hesitant. The watch was my only tangible connection to whatever secret Grandpa Joe had been keeping. What if I sent it off and never saw it again? But deep down, I knew this was the only way to get answers. I followed their detailed instructions for packaging and delivered it personally to the shipping company they'd arranged. And then I waited. 3 weeks later, A thick envelope with Swiss postage arrived at my apartment. Inside was a formal letter on heavy cream-colored stationery with the Patek Philippe letterhead, along with a detailed report and several glossy photographs of the watch under professional lighting. My hands trembled as I read. Dear Mr. Mitchell, following our thorough examination, we can confirm that the timepiece you submitted is indeed a genuine Patek Philippe reference 1563 from our limited D-Day Command Series, commissioned in 1944. The watch bears a serial number 640783, which our archives confirm was presented to Lieutenant Joseph Mitchell Sr. for his role in planning and execution of Operation Overlord D-Day Invasion of Normandy. Given its historical significance and extreme rarity, we estimate its current market value between $3.8 to $4.5 million USD, depending on auction conditions. We would be honored to offer our services should you wish to restore this remarkable piece to working condition or to assist with sale or insurance valuation. Please contact us at your convenience to discuss next steps. I had to stop reading. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor, the letter still clutched in my hand. This was real. The watch was real. Worth more money than I could comprehend. Joseph Mitchell Sr., my great-grandfather. Grandpa Joe's father. The initials matched Jim, and now the timeline made sense too. This watch had been awarded to my great-grandfather for his service in World War II, specifically for his role in D-Day. I gathered myself and read on. The report detailed the watch's condition, remarkably good despite the surface wear, its specific features, and its manufacturing history. There was also a note about its provenance in their records. According to Patek Philippe's archives, Lieutenant Joseph Mitchell Sr. had received the watch in a formal ceremony in late 1944. It had remained in his possession until his death in 1972, after which it was legally transferred to his son, Joseph Mitchell Jr., my grandfather. So Grandpa Joe had owned this watch for nearly 50 years, keeping it hidden all this time. But why? Why not display it proudly as a family heirloom? Why not tell anyone about it? I spent the rest of the evening in a research frenzy, looking up everything I could find about my great-grandfather and Operation Overlord planning. There wasn't much. He wasn't Eisenhower or Patton, but I found mentions of him in several historical accounts. He had been part of the intelligence team, helping to analyze German defenses along the beaches. According to a brief military biography I found, Joseph Mitchell Sr. had been a mathematics professor before the war, then used those analytical skills for military intelligence. After D-Day, he continued serving to the end of the war, received several commendations, and returned to teaching afterward. He had kept a low profile about his war service, rarely discussing it even with family. From what little I could find, he seemed to have viewed his role as simply doing his duty, nothing deserving of special recognition. That humility apparently ran in the family. But it still didn't explain why Grandpa Joe had kept the watch hidden all these years. A family heirloom this significant, both historically and financially, would normally be displayed proudly or at least known about by other family members. I called my father the next morning. Dad, did you know Grandpa had a gold watch from World War II? Something that belonged to his father? A long pause on the other end. The Patek? He showed it to me once, maybe 30 years ago. You knew about it? I was shocked. Why didn't he ever mention it to anyone else? Why hide it in his jacket? Another pause. It's complicated, Mike. Not something I want to discuss over the phone. I'll come over tonight. That was weird. My father, the king of emotional distance, suddenly wanted an in-person conversation. Now I was really curious. When Dad arrived that evening, he looked unusually serious. He sat heavily on my couch, declining the beer I offered. "Show me what you found," he said without preamble. I handed him the letter from Patek Philippe and the note from Grandpa's jacket. He read them silently, his expression unreadable. "Where's the watch?" he finally asked. "Still in Switzerland. They're authenticating it." Dad nodded slowly. "I wondered if he'd found a way to pass it on to you. He always said you were the only one who'd appreciate what it really meant." "But what does it mean?" I asked. "Why keep something this valuable hidden away?" Dad sighed. "Your grandfather had a complicated relationship with his father's war service. Joseph Sr., your great-grandfather, never talked about the war, never wanted recognition. He turned down medals, refused to participate in veterans' events, wouldn't even watch war movies. Because of PTSD? I asked. That would make sense. Partly, but mostly because of what happened afterward. In the 1950s, during McCarthy's communist witch hunts, your great-grandfather was falsely accused of having communist sympathies. His wartime intelligence work was questioned. Former colleagues distanced themselves. The university where he taught put him on leave. I was stunned. I'd never heard any of this. But he was a war hero. He helped plan D-Day. Didn't matter. It was a paranoid time. He was eventually cleared, but the damage was done. His reputation was tarnished. He became bitter about how the country he'd served had turned on him. He packed away all his military items, including the watch, and never spoke of his service again. And Grandpa Joe kept the watch hidden because of that? Dad nodded. He inherited it when Joseph Sr. died, but he respected his father's feelings about it. And then there was a value issue. What do you mean? By the 1980s, these watches were becoming valuable collector's items. Grandpa worried that if people knew he had it, it would become just about the money. He didn't want that. To him, it represented something his father had done out of duty and patriotism, not for recognition or reward. But why hide it in his Vietnam jacket? Why not in a safe deposit box? Dad actually smiled slightly at that. You need to understand your grandfather. He never trusted banks much. Said if something was important enough to keep safe, it should be kept close. That jacket went everywhere with him. It was his own subtle nod to his military service, which he was proud of despite his father's disillusionment. It was starting to make sense now. The watch wasn't just a valuable antique. It was a complicated symbol of family history, duty, and the sometimes harsh treatment of veterans. And he left it to me because you were the only one who visited him regularly without wanting anything. The only one who listened to his stories. The only one who might understand that some things are worth more than their dollar value. I thought about the rest of the family, how they'd eagerly divided up the money and possessions, how they'd laughed at my old army jacket inheritance. How different would they have acted if they'd known what it contained? So what do I do now? I asked. It's worth millions. I can't just keep it in my sock drawer. Dad shrugged. It's legally yours. Grandpa had clear title to it from his father's estate, and now you have clear title through his will, even if the specific item wasn't mentioned. You can sell it, keep it, donate it to a museum, whatever you think is right. The weight of the decision felt heavy. Part of me wanted to keep it, to honor Grandpa's evident wish that it stay in the family with someone who understood its true value. But another part recognized the financial reality. I was living paycheck to paycheck in a mediocre apartment, driving a car that broke down monthly. That kind of money would change everything. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Ron, the watch repair guy. Saw this and thought of you. Call me. Attached was a link to a local news article. The headline made my stomach drop. Milwaukee man discovers rare World War II watch worth millions. I showed my phone to Dad, who cursed under his breath. How did they find out? Ron must have talked, I said, anger rising. He's the only person besides Patek Philippe who knew. Dad looked grim. This complicates things. Once this gets out. He didn't need to finish. The family would come crawling out of the woodwork, suddenly very interested in my worthless inheritance. I opened the article, scanning quickly. It was light on details, no mention of Joseph Mitchell Sr., just that a local man had discovered an extremely rare timepiece with connections to D-Day in his late grandfather's possessions. The article quoted an anonymous expert estimating its value at potentially millions. Ron had clearly been talking to someone, though he'd at least had the decency not to name me directly. But in a family like mine, it wouldn't take long for people to connect the dots. Sure enough, as Dad and I were still discussing next steps, my phone started buzzing. Aunt Linda, then Cousin Dave, then 3 more family members I barely spoke to. Voicemails and texts piled up, all with the same basic message. Is it true? Call me ASAP. Dad put his hand on my shoulder. Whatever you decide to do, do it quickly. This is about to become a circus. He was right. By morning, my voicemail was full, my email inbox overflowing, and someone, probably Dave, had apparently given my number to a local reporter who left a message requesting an interview about my historically significant find. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I contacted Patek Philippe again, asking about options for the watch, restoration, museum loan possibilities, private sale processes. I needed to understand all my options before the family descended, but the quiet research phase didn't last long. By the end of the week, the story had spread from local news to national outlets. World War II hero's multi-million-dollar watch found in Vietnam vet's jacket, read one headline. D-Day watch emerges after decades, proclaimed another. And then my apartment buzzer rang. It was Aunt Linda, Cousin Dave, and two other relatives I hadn't seen since Grandpa's funeral. We need to talk about the watch, Linda said when I answered the intercom. As a family, I knew what that meant. They weren't here to help me do the right thing. They were here for their share of an unexpected windfall. The same people who had mocked my inheritance of an old army jacket now wanted to be part of the decision-making about what had been hidden inside it. My phone kept ringing as I stood there. Another call coming in from a number I didn't recognize. Probably another reporter, or maybe a lawyer, or an auction house. The circus had officially begun. I didn't answer the buzzer. Instead, I texted Dad. They're downstairs. What should I do? His reply was immediate. Don't let them in. Not yet. Meet me at Frank's in 30. Frank's was a diner we sometimes went to after fishing trips with Grandpa Joe. Neutral territory. Smart move. I grabbed Grandpa's jacket. No way was I leaving in the apartment with vultures circling, and slipped out the back exit of my building, avoiding the impromptu family reunion happening at the front door. Cousin Dave called as I was driving to meet Dad. I let it go to voicemail, but played it on speaker while navigating through traffic. Mike, hey, buddy, it's Dave. So, crazy news about that watch, huh? Listen, we're all super happy for you. Seriously. But we should talk as a family about this. It's a big deal, you know? Grandpa Joe would have wanted us all to benefit from something like this. Call me back. Okay? We're all at your place. I couldn't help but laugh. Dave hadn't visited Grandpa once in the 3 years he was in the hospice. But suddenly he was an expert on what Grandpa would have wanted. 2 minutes later, Aunt Linda called. Her voicemail was less subtle. Michael, this is your Aunt Linda. We need to discuss this watch situation immediately. There are serious legal questions about assets not specifically mentioned in the will. I've already spoken with my attorney. Call me back right away. Of course, she'd already contacted a lawyer. Linda was the type who'd sue her own shadow if she thought it was withholding something from her. Dad was already at Frank's when I arrived, sitting in a back booth with a cup of coffee and a serious expression. They're not going to let this go easily, he said as I slid into the booth. They have no claim, I replied, probably sounding more confident than I felt. The watch was in the jacket. The jacket was left to me. End of story. Legally, you're right. But family is rarely about what's legal. It's about what people feel entitled to. Dad sighed, looking older than his 62 years. They're going to make your life hell until they get what they want. Which is what? A share of money they didn't earn from an inheritance they mocked. Dad nodded. That's exactly what they want. The waitress came over, an older woman who'd been serving at Frank's since I was a kid. She took one look at our expressions and just refilled Dad's coffee and brought me the same without asking. Sometimes I love small-town rhythms. What did your lawyer friend say? Dad asked after she left. I'd texted a law school buddy the night before, seeking advice without giving too many details. Pretty straightforward. The jacket was explicitly left to me in the will. Everything in the jacket, including the watch, is legally mine. The fact that the will didn't specifically mention the watch doesn't matter. Dad nodded. And Grandpa's note? Does that help? It's not necessary from a legal standpoint, but it certainly makes his intentions clear. He knew the watch was in the jacket and meant for me to have it. We sat in silence for a moment, coffee steam rising between us. Outside the diner window, Milwaukee went about its business, oblivious to our family drama over millions of dollars. So, what are you going to do? Dad finally asked. It was the $1 million question. Or rather, the $4 million question. I honestly don't know. I admit it. Part of me wants to tell them all to go to hell. Another part recognizes that this is life-changing money, and maybe sharing some would be the right thing to do. Dad studied me for a moment. And what would Grandpa want? That stopped me. What would Grandpa Joe want? The man who'd kept his valuable heirloom hidden for decades, who'd specifically given to me and no one else. He'd want it used well, I said slowly, not squandered, not fought over. He'd want it to mean something beyond just dollars. Dad smiled slightly. That sounds about right. My phone buzzed again. 3 more texts from family members I barely spoke to, all suddenly very concerned about family unity and what Grandpa would have wanted. They're not going to stop, I said. No, they're not, Dad agreed. So you need a plan. Over the next hour, fueled by mediocre diner coffee and a shared plate of fries, we hatched that plan. By the time we left Frank's, I knew exactly what I needed to do. First stop, a meeting with an actual estate attorney. The lawyer's office was everything you'd expect. Dark wood, leather chairs, framed diplomas on the wall. Patricia Winters was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain around her neck. So, you've discovered a valuable watch in your grandfather's jacket, she said after I explained the situation. And now family members who previously showed no interest in your inheritance are suddenly very interested. That's the short version. I agreed. She reviewed the will, Grandpa's note, and the Patek Philippe authentication letter. Then she sat back and folded her hands on her desk. Legally, this is straightforward. The jacket was explicitly bequeathed to you. The watch was inside the jacket. Therefore, the watch is yours. Your grandfather's note only reinforces his intent, though it's not necessary for establishing ownership. So, if they try to challenge it, they'd lose. Quickly and expensively. She tapped the will. This is unambiguous. But family disputes are rarely just about the law. They're about emotions, history, perceived fairness. I nodded. That's exactly what Dad had said. What would you recommend? Document everything. The condition in which you found the watch. The note. All communications with family members. Then decide what you want to do with the watch, not what they want. I left her office with a solid understanding of my legal position and a clearer head. The watch was unquestionably mine. Any action I took would be from a position of choice, not obligation. My next stop was back to my apartment, where I knew the family ambush would be waiting. Sure enough, Aunt Linda, Cousin Dave, and 3 other relatives were sitting in the lobby of my building, looking like they'd been there for hours, which they probably had. Finally, Linda exclaimed when she saw me, "We've been waiting forever. We need to talk." I nodded, surprisingly calm now that I had a plan. "Yes, we do, but not in the lobby. Let's go up to my apartment." They followed me like a parade of vultures, Dave immediately launching into a spiel as soon as my door closed behind us. "Listen, Mike, we're all really happy for you. This is amazing. But we feel like Grandpa wanted everyone to benefit from such a valuable family heirloom." I let him finish, then looked directly at each of them. "Before we go any further, I want to be clear about something. The watch is legally mine. I've confirmed this with the state attorney. The will explicitly left the jacket to me, and everything in it is mine by extension." Linda's face hardened. But Grandpa couldn't have known about the watch's value. If he had, he knew exactly what it was and what it was worth. I interrupted, pulling out the note. He deliberately hid it in a jacket he knew only I would appreciate. His intentions couldn't be clearer. Dave tried a different angle. "But we're family. We should share in this windfall together." I couldn't help but laugh. Where was this family spirit when Grandpa was sitting alone in the hospice? When he needed someone to take him to doctor appointments? When he just wanted a phone call on his birthday? The room fell uncomfortably silent. None of them could look me in the eye. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "I'm going to sell the watch. It's going to auction at Sotheby's next month. After that, I'll decide what to do with the proceeds, and my decision will be final. Linda's face turned an alarming shade of red. You can't just... I can and I will, I said firmly. If anyone tries to challenge this legally, Patricia Winters at Hoffman and Associates is prepared to respond. She assures me it would be a very expensive mistake on your part. That shut them up. Aunt Linda might be litigious, but she wasn't stupid. She knew throwing good money after bad in a losing legal battle would be foolish. Now, I said, moving toward the door, unless you have anything else to discuss, I have arrangements to make. They left in a sullen group, muttering among themselves, but clearly recognizing they'd lost this round. As soon as they were gone, I collapsed onto my couch, emotionally drained but satisfied. Phase 1 of the plan was complete. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Patek Philippe connected me with Sotheby's, who were ecstatic to feature the watch in their upcoming important watches auction. They arranged for secure transport from Switzerland to New York, professional photography, and a feature spot in their catalog. The marketing was intense. D-Day Commander's watch emerges after decades. Read the headlines. Historical photos of my great-grandfather appeared in auction previews. The watch's journey from the beaches of Normandy to my grandfather's Vietnam jacket became an irresistible human interest story. I declined all interviews, much to the frustration of reporters who camped outside my apartment. I had nothing to say publicly. Not yet. Aunt Linda tried a different approach, sending a formal-looking letter demanding at least 20% of the proceeds for family. Dave went with emotional manipulation, sending a long email about his kids' college funds and his underwater mortgage. I filed both away without responding. Dad stayed neutral but supportive, telling me simply, "It's your decision. You're the one Grandpa trusted." The day of the auction, I flew to New York. Sotheby's had offered to stream it for me privately, but I wanted to be there in person. I needed to see this through. The auction house was intimidating, all polished marble and hushed voices. I felt severely underdressed in my khakis and button-down shirt among people wearing outfits that probably cost more than my car. Lot 237. An extremely rare and historically significant Patek Philippe reference 1563 D-Day Command Series, 1944. The auctioneer's description was lengthy, detailing the watch's historical importance, its connection to Operation Overlord, its journey through 3 generations of my family. Photos of my great-grandfather and Grandpa, Joe appeared on the screen behind him. The bidding started at $1 million. What happened next was surreal. Hands raised. Phone bids came in, online bidders chimed in. The price climbed rapidly. $1.5 million, $2 million, $3 million. I watched numb as wealthy collectors from around the world fought over my grandfather's hidden treasure. When the hammer finally fell, the winning bid was $4.6 million. With a buyer's premium, the final price would be over $5.3 million. $5.3 million. The room applauded. The auctioneer nodded respectfully in my direction. Several people glanced curiously at me. The plainly dressed young man in the back who'd just become a multi-millionaire. But I wasn't thinking about the money. I was thinking about Grandpa Joe, who'd kept this treasure hidden away because he understood its true value wasn't monetary. About my great-grandfather, who'd received it for helping plan an invasion that saved the world from fascism. And I was thinking about what came next. After the auction, a Sotheby's representative escorted me to a private room to sign final paperwork. The proceeds would be transferred to my account within 10 business days, minus their commission. I'd already been in touch with financial advisors recommended by Patricia Winters. "Congratulations," the rep said. "Most family heirlooms don't turn out to be quite so valuable." I nodded, still processing the reality of what had just happened. It was never about the money. She looked confused, but smiled politely anyway. How could she understand? To her, this was just another auction, another commission. To me, it was the culmination of Grandpa Joe's final lesson. The media caught wind of the final price almost immediately. My phone exploded with notifications. Texts from family members who'd suddenly remembered how much they loved me. Calls from reporters seeking comment. Emails from investment advisors and wealth managers offering their services. I ignored them all as I sat in my hotel room that night, staring out at the New York skyline. Tomorrow, I'd fly back to Milwaukee. In 10 days, I have more money than I'd ever imagined possessing. But tonight, I just wanted to think about what Grandpa Joe would do, because I already knew what came next, and it wasn't what anyone in my family would expect, especially not Aunt Linda and Cousin Dave. As I fingered the worn fabric of Grandpa's jacket, which I brought with me to the auction for good luck, I couldn't help but smile at how perfectly his plan had worked out. He'd known exactly what would happen when that watch was discovered, and he'd known exactly who should be the one to find it. 10 days after the auction, I found myself staring at my bank account balance in disbelief. After Sotheby's commission and taxes, I was left with just over $3.8 million. The kind of money that changes everything, sitting there in black and white on my laptop screen. The first thing I did was call Dad. "It's done," I told him. "The money's in." "Have you decided?" he asked simply. "Yeah, I'm going with the original plan." 2 weeks later, I stood at a podium in front of the Milwaukee Veterans Outreach Center, sweating in a suit that still had the price tag tucked in the pocket from yesterday. Behind me, a large banner read JM Legacy Project, with silhouettes of soldiers from World War II and Vietnam. Cameras flashed as I presented an oversized check for $2 million to the center's director. The local news was there, along with representatives from several veterans organizations. Dad sat in the front row, quietly proud. I wasn't much for public speaking, but I prepared a few words. My grandfather wasn't one for empty talk, but the things he valued had soul. His jacket, his stories, his quiet way of showing up when it mattered. I'm glad that out of everyone in the family, I was the one who wore that jacket, just like he knew I would. The veterans in attendance nodded, understanding something deeper than just the money. This wasn't charity. This was honoring a legacy. The center would use the funds to establish comprehensive support services for veterans struggling with reintegration, medical needs, and housing stability. Programs my grandfather would have appreciated. Aunt Linda and Cousin Dave didn't attend, despite being invited. They'd stopped speaking to me after learning that most of their inheritance was going to charity. The rest of the family split into two camps, those who thought I was a saint and those who thought I was a sucker. Neither was true. I was just trying to do what felt right. I kept the remaining $1.8 million for myself, not to show off or live lavishly, but to build the kind of quiet, stable life Grandpa Joe had always encouraged. He'd never been impressed by flashy displays of wealth, only by genuine security and contentment. First order of business was paying off my student loans, all $43,000 of them gone with a single mouse click. Then I bought a modest 3-bedroom house in the same neighborhood where Grandpa had taught me to fish. Nothing fancy, just solid construction with a yard big enough for a dog, and maybe someday a swing set. I quit my soul-crushing marketing job and took 6 months to figure out what I actually wanted to do. Ended up starting a small graphic design studio that I could run from home. The work was challenging and creative, and for the first time, I could choose projects based on interest rather than desperate need for a paycheck. The media attention eventually died down. The watch became a footnote in auction house history. The family drama faded to occasional awkward encounters at weddings and funerals. Life settled into a new normal. I adopted a scruffy shelter mutt named Cooper, who loved boat rides and swimming in the lake. My home office looked out over the water, and sometimes I'd take breaks just to watch the waves and think about Grandpa. I kept his jacket hanging prominently in my closet, not as a reminder of the fortune it contained, but the man who'd worn it for decades. Sometimes I'd still put it on during cool evenings by the lake. About a year after the auction, I bumped into a woman named Sarah at a local coffee shop. She was a physical therapist who worked with veterans at the center funded by the JM Legacy Project. We got to talking, first about the program, then about everything else. 3 months later, we were dating. 6 months after that, she moved in. When I finally told her the full story of the watch, the jacket, and my grandfather's trust, she just smiled and said, "He must have been an excellent judge of character." Coming from someone who worked daily with the people benefiting from Grandpa's hidden treasure, it felt like the highest compliment. Aunt Linda eventually came around, in her way. At a family Thanksgiving 2 years later, she cornered me by the dessert table. "You know, that veteran center's done some good work," she admitted grudgingly. "My friend's son got help there when he came back from Afghanistan. The counseling program really turned things around for him." It was as close to an apology as I was likely to get, and I accepted it with a nod. Cousin Dave never fully forgave me for not writing him a check. Last I heard, he was still underwater on his mortgage and blaming everyone but himself. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never found that hidden compartment in the jacket, if I'd sold it to that hipster barista or donated it to Goodwill, if I'd never felt that odd thickness in the lining. But then I remember what Grandpa Joe used to tell me during our long afternoons at the hospice. Things stay silent until you're ready to understand them. And I did understand, finally. That watch wasn't just about money. It was about trust, legacy, and recognizing what truly matters. Grandpa had trusted me to get the message, even after he was gone. Today, Cooper and I still take the boat out to that fishing spot Grandpa loved. Sarah joins us when she's not working. Sometimes I wear the jacket, especially on cooler evenings when the lake breeze picks up. The JM Legacy Project has helped hundreds of veterans now. There's a small display in the center's lobby about the watch and the two Joseph Mitchells who served their country in different wars. Visitors often stop to read their story. As for me, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Not rich in the way Aunt Linda wanted to be, but wealthy in all the ways that actually count. Just like Grandpa knew I would be. That old jacket hangs in my closet now. The hidden compartment's still there, but empty. Its secret has been told. Its mission accomplished. Yet somehow, when I wear it, I still feel like I'm discovering something new. A connection to the past, yes, but also a reminder of what's possible when you pay attention to the things that truly matter. As Grandpa Joe would say, with that slight smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, the best treasures aren't the ones you find. They're the ones that find you when you're ready for them.